There we go. So I'm Dr. Hawken, and I work for the Academic Center for Excellence. Welcome to the training for the study skills tutoring that you do over for housing. What is it called? ARC? Or did they change? Yeah, that's right. I have to keep up with a lot of names of places here at FSU. There's so many of them. So I'm really excited that I actually remembered one of them. We're going to go over several different things today. One is just going to be just really basic, how to be a tutor kind of stuff. Most of it's real common sense, and it's pretty easy to do. This job in general is a really nice mix of being something that's kind of interesting. You have to use your brain a little bit, but it's also really easy, except when there's problems. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the problems don't happen that often. But it's a very rewarding job because you're helping people, and you really are. And the tutors here at Florida State University, whether they're helping with study skills and time management, or they're helping with calculus and chemistry, do a really valuable service for us here at FSU. And I don't know if any of you are really aware of this, but Florida State University is ranked in the top 20 now for public universities in the country. And one of the big reasons for that, not the only reason, but one of the big reasons for that is because we've got so many great services to help students be successful. When I went to undergrad way back in the 1600s, they basically had a sink or swim attitude about it. They threw you into the water, and if you were successful, great. And if not, oh well. Sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s, schools started to realize, if students don't drop out, they keep giving us money. So there's some selfish reasons for it, but there were a bunch of studies done back then on what do we have to do to keep college students in college. Back in the 90s and 80s, people, if you had a 65 or 70% graduation rate, you were considered to be pretty good school. Does anybody here know what Florida State University's graduation rate is? 95%. 95% of the people that come to Florida State University graduate. And the 5% who don't usually have some pretty extenuating circumstances that prevent them from getting through, or they don't take advantage of these resources. And the reason is because we've got all these resources to help students out. Now, there is a catch. You've probably also heard that, cost of tuition at universities across the country skyrocketed in the last 20 years. There's other reasons for it, but one of the reasons is that we've got so many new programs, and those programs cost money. How many of you are doing this tutoring for free? Yeah, I'm not doing this for free either. So that's the only catch. Hopefully schools can kind of figure out a way to work that out in the future. But in the meantime, we're providing these great services. People are paying more for it, but they're getting the most out of it that they can, whereas in the past, that wasn't always the case. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And is everybody looking at something that says Tutoring 101? Excellent. I've got two screens up, so I always get a little bit nervous that you're looking at my background on my other screen, which right now is a dinosaur eating people. Actually, that's pretty cool. Maybe I should put that on. So the thing that we're going to start off with are the bare bone basics, how to be a tutor. It's a little bit different for what you're tutoring than, say, if you're tutoring math or science or something like that. None of that matters. I forgot I added that to the beginning of this. It used to be at the end. But one of the things that's really important to know about being a tutor of any type, whether it's study skills or tutoring chemistry and math, it's not about giving people all the answers. It's about being a role model. I don't know what the requirements are for over at housing for their tutors, but we typically over here hire people that are pretty good students. Although, if you're a struggling student, being a tutor could be a really great way to get over it because you learn a lot. You learn as much as you do helping people. Um, but you're being a coach, an encouraging coach, a guide to critical thinking. You're facilitating the learning process. And that's what a tutor is all about. And there's a stereotype of the tutor being a teacher, and there is some teaching involved, but that's not really what a tutor is about. So our official Florida State University definition of a tutor is, it's somebody who enhances our students' classroom learning experiences and promotes further engagement with rigorous academic material. And what that really comes down to is just teaching people how to study in a way that they're going to keep learning. And that's why these study skills type tutoring programs are really important, and they're new. We've only had these at ACE for about 3 years now, and I think Housing just started doing it a couple of years ago. But they're really valuable because in the end, most students don't really need more help with their math homework or their chemistry exam. What they really need help with is learning how to approach those assignments and exams on their own. And in a way, people will probably never see it this way, but in a way, tutors like you are more important than our chemistry tutors and math tutors, because you're teaching somebody something that they can take from class to class to class and apply it and be better students and not need to come into tutoring for writing or for arithmetic, accounting, or whatever else we do tutoring for at FSU. So the number one thing that you're doing before you do anything else is just establishing a comfortable environment for your tutors or your students. Your students are coming in, especially the ones that come in for study skills. They're usually struggling. They're frustrated. They might even be a little bit scared. They feel dumb. They're not. You can't even get into FSU if you're not a pretty smart person. And you can look somebody in the eye with confidence and tell them at FSU that they're capable of being successful here. But they need some encouragement and they need some support. And if nothing else you do, talking about time management and study skills, if none of that's helpful, just having somebody to talk to that'll listen to them could be a big help. You have to respect each student as an individual. We've got a really diverse population here at FSU, and it's really important that that you're willing to work with people from different countries, with different parts of the country, different viewpoints than you, different race, gender, etc. All of that stuff, you don't know who's going to come in the door, and your job's to help them. So you have to respect everybody as an individual. You have to be courteous and cooperative. You have to have a good attitude. And you need to give them your undivided attention. We're trying to help them become independent learners. So it'll be really important for you to learn to probe them for understanding of the material you're giving them. In a way, what we're doing right now is I'm teaching, I'm not tutoring. And you can tell because I'm talking too much. You'll know you had a really great tutoring session when the student did most of the talking, because you asked them the right questions and encouraged them to look at this material and figure out what's going to be helpful for them, rather than you just telling them all about it. Sometimes you just have to tell them everything, because sometimes they're going to come in and they're going to cross their arms and be like, I don't know about every question you ask, and that's okay. But your goal as a tutor is to get them to talk and them to engage with the information that you're giving them. So you want to make suggestions to them to accomplish their goals, but your goal is to get them to think for themselves and to figure out what's going to work best for them. Always have a positive attitude. If you're having a bad day and it shows, it's going to impact your tutoring session, and your student's going to walk away from you with less confidence in the information you gave them. And express confidence in their ability. I teach a little bit over at TCC as kind of as a hobby. My degree is actually in history. So I go over there and teach history classes. And there are students at TCC who can't do the work because anybody can go to TCC if they've got the money to do it. And most of them can. Most of these students are great over there, but there's a handful of them, maybe 10, 15% of them that really can't do it. And I learned that the hard way my first semester teaching there when I told all my students, I guaranteed them they'd do better in my class if they came to my office hours. Because when I taught here at FSU, it was true. It wasn't true over there. But here at FSU, the students are all capable of doing the work. If they're not, there's something else holding them back. And it's not your job to figure out what's holding them back, but you can with confidence look at a student and say, I know you can do this, and offer them positive reinforcement when they get things right and when they show an understanding of what's going on. So that's ultimately what, being a tutor here at FSU, that's the main thing that it's about, is just getting with the student and showing them some confidence in yourself and also in them and their abilities, and then giving them some suggestions of some things they can do to kind of start building up their confidence in themselves. That's not so important. Oops. So the things that you want to try to avoid, you don't want to lecture too much. I'm going to lecture too much today because I've got too much information to give you in too short a time, but we'll have a couple of little activities in a minute. But you don't want to be a lecturer too much. Sometimes it's going to happen. I mean, you can only give, what the student gives you. If the student isn't giving you any information, you ask them the question, they're like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Well, you can't sit there and ask them questions and have them say, I don't know for an hour. That's not going to help anybody. So you'll get that student where you end up lecturing them. But it's a shame because in those particular circumstances, you're doing the best you can. But if the student isn't doing the best they can, it's not really helping them that much. So you don't want to be an enabler. You don't want to give them easy outs. You really want to encourage them to interact with you as much as possible. And you can't make them do it. But you want to guide them more so than teach them if at all possible. You don't really have to worry so much about doing their homework for them with study skills. But if you ever do run into a student that's trying to get you to do work for them, report that to your supervisor because that's not helping you, nor is it helping that student at all. This isn't so important for you. So some of this stuff is ACE specific, but some of this is going to be very relevant to what you're doing over at over for housing. I'm not sure how they handle your check or clocking in and out. So you'll have to talk to your supervisor about that specifically. And I don't know what their dress code is. But it is really, really important, however they've got it set up there, that you're on time. And what we have found, especially this last year with COVID, I've rarely had issues with students coming in late or tutors coming in late or missing appointments when we were all in person. When I went online, I had more issues with that with some of my tutors missing appointments or showing up late. And what we found is if you can email a student ahead of time and say, hey, I'm really sorry, I had to cancel your appointment. There is no appointment. You're not going to have one at all. The tutor got sick or they couldn't make it or they're having technical problems or whatever it was. We got a much more positive reaction to that than we did when a tutor showed up, but they were 5 or 10 minutes late. So a tutor or a student would rather have their appointment canceled, but they know about it and they know why, than to have you show up a little bit late. They don't want to feel like they're wasting their time. They understand that stuff happens. You get sick sometimes. You get in a car wreck on the way to work. That happened to me once. Things happen. But the best that you can, make sure that your supervisor knows that you're not going to be there so they can do something about it. But showing up on time is really essential for these students. And from your own personal experience that it's really frustrating taking the time to go to something and having them not be there. Be discreet with confidential information. Tutoring is FERPA protected. Does anybody know what FERPA is? FERPA is a federal law. So this isn't an FSU policy at all. This is a federal law that protects students' academic information. And it came to be about 20 years ago now, to protect students from two things. One are information gatherers, like marketers, who try to get information about students that it's private information, and they try to get the information for marketing and advertising and stuff like that. But more frequent and more a bigger issue than that is for everybody that's, every 9 of you that have a really great relationship with your parents. There's a student who has very bad relationship with their parents, maybe abusive, manipulative of parents that they're estranged from, who will try to use their academic information against them or take advantage of them. So we have these laws to protect students' information, and tutoring is covered by that. So you have to be very careful about talking about student information. You can't tell people the names of the students that came in to see you. Now, the people you work with, you can. If it's directly related to the the academic success of that student, you can talk to your supervisor or a coworker about it if it helps you to be a better tutor, or to help that student. But outside of that, my wife works for FSU as an administrative position as well, and we deal with students all the time. It's natural you're going to talk about that weird student you have come in that says or does something really strange or funny when you're tutoring them. Just don't use their name. And I know my wife would never, ever, ever rat on me if I used the name of a student that I worked with. And yet I still would never tell her the name of a student because it's not her business. So be really careful about being confidential with the information that you have. And then, if you've got a returning student, that doesn't happen too often with study skills tutors, but it does sometimes. If you have a returning student, it's always really good to take a little bit of time, just 5-10 minutes, and review what you went over before to make sure they still understand it. But otherwise, you get a student, they come in, you establish a rapport with them. Take a couple of minutes, ask them, where they're from or what their major is or something, just to kind of get an idea of who they are. Maybe say a little bit about yourself, especially if you're doing any online tutoring. It's really important to humanize the experience as much as possible. You're just a person, they're just a person, and you're there to help them. Make sure that they've checked in. I don't know what the process is for housing, but I know for us, it's really important that we know that students came and that they've properly checked in, so that we have data on it, because that's where we get the money to be able to pay tutors to do this stuff, is by showing that students actually do come here for help. Then ask the student what their issue is. What do they want to get out of this session? What kind of problems are they dealing with? And take a little bit of time to listen to them, get an idea of what their problem is. Is it a time management problem? Is it a studying problem? Is it a motivation problem? And just kind of listen to them and kind of do, you can usually fairly easily assess, just listening to them talk, is this a time management problem or a study skills problem? And then come up with a plan of what you're going to do. The students want to know, this is what we're going to work on. This is why. Anybody have any questions? Okay. And then again, give them your undivided attention. One thing that's really common is, most people, not everybody, most of us are a little bit addicted to our telephones. And yet there may be legitimate reasons that you're going to use your laptop or your telephone in the tutoring session. You want to look something up really quick that you think will be useful for them. That's okay, but make sure you tell them what you're doing, because if they just see you looking at your phone or looking at your laptop, they're going to think you're not paying attention unless they know exactly what it is you're doing. And if you're not using the laptop or your tablet or your phone to help them, then you shouldn't be using it at all. Try to be interactive, try to get them to, repeat things back to you, try to get them actively working on the materials that they're looking at. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a bit. And break it into smaller parts, take things one step at a time so they don't feel overwhelmed. So I'm going to be showing the study cycle in a little bit. And it's nice to show the study cycle. It's like, here's the study cycle, but it's broken down into pieces, and it's broken down into pieces, one, to organize it, but two, to make it so that you can kind of process it, step by step. Ask the students a lot of questions. That's the best way to get them to learn, is to get them talking. You look at the study cycle and say, how do you think this might apply to you? Or, how do you understand the way that this might work? That sort of thing. And then you clarify when they don't understand and explain how to do things. And then when you're done, and this is important in tutoring, you have to check for understanding. And you can't just say, do you understand? Because what are they going to say? They're always going to say yes, not always, but almost always going to say yes. But it's not always necessarily true. So one really great word of advice is to get them to explain it back to make sure they understand what it is you're saying. Be honest about your knowledge. If you don't know the answer to a question, it is okay to say you don't understand. Nobody knows everything. If it's something particularly important, just tell them, well, we'll find out for you. And then you can talk to your supervisor and try to figure out what it might be, particularly in regards to campus referrals. Sometimes we have something for everybody. Whatever your problem is, there's somebody that can help you out with it. But it's not always obvious who it is, because sometimes people have some really complex issues. Do be aware of the different kinds of ways that people learn. But study skills tutoring, it's not as important to, you don't need to focus on whether somebody's a visual learner or not. You're kind of trying to help them figure that out for themselves. This, we're going to go into more detail later. Body language, it's really, really important to face the student. Use hand gestures moderately. Hand gestures are good, but if you're somebody that really talks with your hands, be a little bit careful, especially if you've got international students, because some international cultures are weirded out a little bit by Americans because we talk with our hands so much. So gestures are good, but if you're one of those people that gestures a lot, just be aware of who you're talking to and how, and make sure that they're kind of comfortable, because there are just some cultures that are just a little bit weirded out by that. Keep your hands to yourself. Don't be touching people. For that matter, you don't let, one thing about working at FSU, at least in tutoring, you have to treat people with respect. It's really important. You need to be treated with respect as well. I don't know how housing handles this, but I'd be surprised if they're any different. But I know over at ACE, I tell my tutors, if you've got a student that's really making you uncomfortable, if they say anything derogatory to you, if they touch you in a way that's inappropriate, over here at ACE, I tell my tutors, get up and walk away. Go find a supervisor. You don't have to put up with that. This isn't working at a grocery store where they make you put up with all kinds of crap that they shouldn't. You've got a right to be treated with respect in your job. You treat them with respect, but they have to treat you with respect as well. Do be aware of that, but also, make sure that they're comfortable, that they feel like, they don't feel like you're, judging them or taking advantage of them in any way. Not a lot when they're talking, look them in the eyes when you can, don't stare at them, but, give them some eye contact. They need to know that you're listening, that you're paying attention, that you're really there, that you care. It's not so important. Typically, and I say typically because there's exceptions to the rule, you're not typically your student's friend. Um, I don't know what the rules are at housing. You might want to check on this, but I always tell our tutors here, I mean, if you have a friend who needs help, it's usually a good idea to recommend they see a different tutor than you so that you know that they're getting an objective look. But, we're all professionals here, and it doesn't mean that if you're tutoring a friend of yours that you're doing something wrong necessarily, so long as you are making sure that you're getting them help and not, being friendly with them when they need somebody to be honest with them. Um, but on the flip side, and I don't think you see it as much with study skills as you do with tutors for like, math and science or writing. Um, but there are documented cases of students who get really friendly with their tutors. And they're like, turns out you have a lot in common with them. Then they want to hang out with you. And the next thing you know, you're getting texts and phone calls and emails at 3 in the morning asking you for tutoring help. And so you do have to be really, really careful about, the relationships you develop with these people because they're looking for help. You don't want to take advantage of that, and you also don't want them to take advantage of you. So, avoid, doing that thing where it's like, well, we're running out of time, but maybe I can give you a little extra help later. A lot of times that can lead to, you being harassed or even stalked in the worst case scenarios. Don't gossip with your students. You got to be really careful what you say about, if somebody says, yeah, I'm really struggling in my biology class, and you're like, and they say they got Dr. Jones, and you're like, oh, I had biology with Dr. Jones. Yeah, he was terrible. What a jerk. Things like that can get around. And I actually had a funny one happen to me a couple of years ago where I got a phone call from one of the physics professors here at FSU. I picked up the phone and he's like, so I hear your tutors think I suck. And I'm like, what? Turned out that there was a student walking out of his classroom, and she had a friend, and the friend was struggling and complaining about the class and how hard it was. And the professor overheard the second student say, oh, I wouldn't even worry about it. My tutor says this guy sucks. And I never did figure out who that tutor was. Oh man, I wish I knew who it was. But now it's possible that student just said that and it wasn't even true. But it's a small world and things get around. It's okay to make recommendations to students. It's okay to say that a class is hard, to be honest about it, but be really careful about saying anything that's gossipy or very judgmental because it can get around and it can come back to haunt you. And it's typically, obviously a really bad idea to date your students. If you're going to date somebody, at least make sure they're not coming into tutoring with you anymore because there's just too many ethical issues that could come up, especially if the relationship doesn't work out in the end. And I also can't emphasize enough that you're not responsible for the success of your students. You're going to feel like you are, but you're not. Students are going to come in and they're going to pressure you to get them extra help. Now it's a little easier as a study skills tutor because you're usually not given any kind of direct homework. But just students will try to get you to do more than you're able. They'll try to get you to make recommendations. They find out you are in the same biology class as them. They'll try to get you to do extra work. It doesn't happen often, but if it does, do know that, you're one small part of the machine. They come to tutoring for help. You're going to help them out the best you can, but they're still responsible for doing the things that you recommend. They're still responsible for their own studying. They're still responsible for their own work. I even tell the course-based tutors, even if you give a student a wrong answer, they're still responsible for confirming what they learned from you. You can't be their only source of information. That said, it will happen. You'll have a student come in and you help them. You teach them study skills. You teach them time management. You work with them. They seem like they get it. They feel real confident when they leave. And then you see them later and they're like, oh yeah, I failed my classes anyway. And you're going to feel guilty about it, like you did something wrong. And it's natural, you'll feel a little guilty, but just be aware you're not responsible for the students' results. That's on them. So you should never feel really pressured by your students to do anything that you think is inappropriate. Be mindful of the time. Students naturally don't like it when it's just like, oh geez, I got another appointment, I gotta let you go right now, sorry, and you kind of kick them out. Keep it out. If you if you got a half-hour appointment, if you got an hour appointment, check in when you've got 5 or 10 minutes left. Let the student know that you need to wrap it up so that they're not rushed at the end to get everything done. Especially if you've got more than one appointment or more student in a row. You don't want to rush somebody out. You also don't want to leave somebody waiting. It's usually really, really helpful to summarize the content at the end. It really helps a lot to help them remember it later. And it's really important to remind them, again, I don't know for sure how housing sets theirs up, but it's really important over here that we have them sign out on the way out, make another appointment if they need it. We get a lot of students over here for study skills that are sent because they had some problems and their professor or their advisor says, yeah, I want you to go to study skills tutoring 3 times. If your student's one of those, you need to make sure they make another appointment, whether it's with you or someone else. And then if you do have any weird issues that come up in your tutoring appointments, let your supervisor know right away if at all possible. The longer you wait, the harder it is to solve issues if there's something weird that happens, like a tutor. Some good examples are if the student acts inappropriately, or if you're really concerned about their mental health, like they seem really despondent or depressed or something like that. Talk to your supervisor as soon as you can so that that they can try to step in and see if that student needs some extra help or something. Does anybody have any questions? We talked about FERPA already, so yeah. So that's the real basics thing about tutoring. Like I said, it's not hard to do. If you're making your student, feel like they belong and you're there to help them, they're usually really happy. Interesting thing with these study skills tutors or students, I should say, is you're getting an interesting mix of ones that are coming in voluntarily, and you're going to get some that come in that are being forced to come in. And they'll have different attitudes, and that's something to definitely be aware of. Don't sweat it if you do have one that comes in with a bad attitude. You just do the best you can, and if they want to have an attitude about it, that's just going to hurt them later. Most of the students, though, are really appreciative of the help that you're giving them. So that's the basic theories of how to be a tutor. This is more of the nuts and bolts of what you're actually going to be telling the tutor or students. Someday I'm going to get it so that I don't keep saying tutor when I mean student and student when I mean tutor. You can ignore the dates on this. The study cycle. Is anybody familiar with the study cycle? The study cycle is something that if you're a good student, you're probably already doing it and just never really thought about what it's called or how it works. This is the lifeblood, the heart itself of study skills tutoring. Does anybody want to guess what's missing on this slide? We've got acing the test at the end and during the lecture at the beginning. What else might you be doing for a study cycle?
Oh, I'll take a guess that first one on the top is probably like preparing for the lecture.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're pre-prep for going into class, or you're wrapping it up after the exam. So yeah, absolutely. Anybody else guess what the other ones are?
Maybe for the one after during the lecture, it would be reviewing all the notes.
And there was a fairly recent study that came out probably about, as far as studies go, it was about 10 years ago, but it wasn't 30 years ago. But there was a study that basically found that if students review their notes the night of or the next morning after they take them, it increases their ability to remember the material on it. Something like 120% or something like that. I don't remember the exact number anymore. It could be really significant. Just taking 10 minutes to do it. I always liken it to painting a wall. You put one layer on the wall when you first write your notes, and it kind of looks like crap. And then you put one more layer on it soon after, and then it really pops and it looks really good. More layers will make it look even better, but just getting that second layer on makes a huge difference. And studying your notes is kind of like that. Anybody have a guess for that third one?
Probably something like preparing for the test.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, it's what you said is actually probably a better explanation than what you're looking at. But the point is that so many people come to class and then they go to their test and they don't do a lot else between there. I think that top one is the one that people miss the most. People don't prepare for their classes very much aside of doing their homework. But it can make a huge difference in success and failure. It depends on the class and it depends on the student a little bit. And I can't emphasize enough, there's no one magical way of doing this that always works for everybody. I always present these things to my students when I have personal academic consultations or I teach student life classes. I always say to them, some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, maybe it won't work for you, and that's okay. But you can take from this anything you think will work and try it out. And if that doesn't work, try the things you think that won't work, because you never know. But what we're trying to convince students of, because it's just true, is that college and preparing for classes and being successful, whether we like it or not, it involves the stuff that's happening outside the classroom, maybe even more so than the stuff that's in the classroom, depending on the class. So one thing that we're trying to encourage our students to do is to think about their schedules in a real holistic way, meaning, looking at it in different ways, not just focusing on the classes. Everybody knows when to go to class. I have a class at 9:30 on Tuesdays, and you go to class at 9:30 on Tuesdays. But when are you doing the work for that class? When have you decided to do that? Most people put on their schedules, when the test is. They'll emphasize that, or when a homework assignment's due. But most people don't think about the time that they're putting into sleeping or going, getting lunch or food. When is that happening? How is that impacting your schedule? And they certainly are not thinking about what they're doing before their class that's actually preparing them for the lecture. Did they read the textbook? So many students, even successful students, a lot of times don't read their book before they go to class. But study after study after study shows that if you do read your book before you go to class, you get so much more out of your lecture. It's also the solution to the infamous question about note-taking. What do I write down? Well, the more information you know going in, the easier it is to solve that. You write the stuff down you don't know. If you've read the book, you know some of the stuff, and you don't have to write everything down because you've already studied some of it. So that can be a big help. But the stuff that's going on after class, the actual test preparations, the actual assignments themselves, all of this stuff, impacts your abilities to do stuff. And what's not on this example are your extracurricular things. How many people here have a club or a sorority or something that you're involved in. You know, most people have other stuff to do, and you should. You don't have to, but you know, you want to be doing something with your time. You want to have fun. For God's sake, have some fun. But there's this thing about student, and I know I was the same way. There's a thing about being a student when you go to college for the first time. You want freedom, and you feel like keeping a schedule takes away from your freedom. You want to wing it and do things when you feel like it or when you want to. But the reality is, when you don't keep a schedule, if you don't manage your time, time is going to control you, and you're losing your freedom, because when you want to be doing stuff, you can't because you didn't get your work done. So we're really emphasizing the study cycle idea. It's kind of the lifeblood of being a college student and being successful. That all these things have to happen one way or the other. Now, how you do it might vary a little bit. What you emphasize might vary a little bit, but essentially, all 5 of these things have to be part of your studying to be successful most of the time. So here are some examples, the specific examples of what I'm talking about. Before your lecture, you know, you want to encourage students. By the way, I'll send all these slides to your supervisor to share with you. I highly recommend taking notes when I'm talking, because it'll help you remember stuff better. But I'll send the slides so you'll have them. But you know, students, a lot of students don't read the syllabus, and they don't know that tomorrow we're talking about photosynthesis in our biology class. That can be really useful information to have going in. And they don't know that because they didn't look it up or they didn't pay attention, either on their syllabus or on their Canvas site. Most people don't read their upcoming material. I'd venture that most students don't do this. And some students do fine anyway. But most of the students that are struggling, this is going to be essential for them. And there's a lot of students, and I know I was one of them, who got to get a B in a class. You know, B is okay. You know, you can live with a B. But a lot of students that get Bs, it's this before lecture stuff that's keeping them from getting the A. The B students do after lecture and test prep stuff. It's the before lecture stuff that they're not doing. And they're not getting A's when they could be getting A's. Yeah, the B's okay. But, you know, just reading the upcoming material ahead of time can really make a big difference for that. Looking at objectives, summaries, diagrams, that could be really helpful. Another really great suggestion for students is to prepare questions to ask in class ahead of time. So if you're not doing this, you know, you know yourself better than me. If you're doing fine in your classes, keep doing what you're doing. But if you're a B student and wants to be an A student, or a C student that wants to be a B student or an A student, I can't recommend enough reading your material ahead of time, taking notes on it, and then based on that, asking questions in class. It's all right to raise your hand in class and say, hey, Professor Jones, the book said blah, 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 and I didn't quite understand that. And you're talking about that now. So I was wondering if you could help me out with that. You know, you can get some really great information out of that. Then during the lecture, you have to take your notes, and everybody knows that. Although you'll occasionally get students coming in. It's like, why are you here to see me today? Because I'm getting a D in all my classes. Great. Do you take notes in your classes? No. Gee, I wonder why you don't know anything in your class. You didn't write anything down. But what's really important about note taking, though, is that, you know, that you're trying to paraphrase it and put it in your own words. And a lot of students don't do that. And the reason you want to try to do that when you can is it helps you to better understand it if you're processing the information in the way that you think. Now, some classes that's going to work better than others, but it's a good thing to think about, trying to paraphrase things in your own words. You want to record the key concepts especially stuff that goes along with the reading. And who here is familiar with Cornell notes? It's a style of note taking. Yeah, a couple of you, because a lot of high schools are pushing that now. And I don't think that the specific nitpicky specifics about how you do that are important. But the thing I like about Cornell notes that I think is important is two things. One, that it emphasizes leaving space between everything so that you can fill in the spaces when you get more information later. But also it makes it easier to read. But especially using the margins of your notes to emphasize and ask questions. So when the professor says this is really important, that you're marking in the next to that part of the notes that this is really important. I always use a star, but you can use anything you want. You don't have time to write out this is important every single time. So you come up with a symbol that represents that. And most students do that. Not all of them. They should. Most of them do that. But what a lot of them don't do is they don't ask questions in their margins. And I think that's an important thing to do, is to mark the things in the margin that are important, and also mark the things that you don't understand so you can either ask about it or look it up later. Then once class is over, like I just talked about a little bit ago, you reinforce what you learned within 24 hours of having done it. And I venture to say that most students don't do this, and they're really missing out. I know it's a pain in the butt. You're done with class for the day. You're like, yay, now I can relax. Taking a little bit of extra time to go over your notes is kind of a pain. But you don't need a lot of time to do it. You just need to go through it, and you're just reinforcing the information by reviewing it within, a short time of taking it. It helps you remember it later. And what the studies show, when you don't, and you look at the material again 2-3 weeks later, it's like you're completely starting over learning that material. And it's harder to remember it. Because, when you're taking your exams, some professors make it more about understanding, but most of them, they're really judging your ability to remember stuff more so than to understand it, which is unfortunate. I actually don't like exams because of that. But the material, you learned it. Remembering it's a whole different thing, and it's so challenging and difficult to do. So I urge people to take a look at those notes within 24 hours, just for a little bit of time, and then clarify sometime after the lecture anything you didn't understand. You can talk to a classmate, you can talk to a TA, you can look it up in the book, but anything you didn't understand, don't just leave it. Go ask the professor, hey, you talked about photosynthesis and I didn't quite understand it. Can you clarify it? It's such a good way to learn. And a lot of the educators also push creating charts and diagrams to help you understand the relationships between different things. And that could be really useful as well. Given more time, I think I would have a whole training on that. But that's something we're actually working on, because I know it's easy to say create charts and diagrams. It's a whole nother thing to actually do it. But that can be a really useful way of memorizing stuff as well, or understanding it. And then the test prep information is important as well. Gathering material, organizing it, and taking practice tests, practice problems, study guides, the whole works. But the thing that people do wrong when they're preparing for their tests is they get their notes out and they just read them over and over and over again. And that's just a terrible way of studying. The best way to study is to do the thing that you're being told to do. So for example, math is easy. You find practice problems and you do practice problems. If you can do the practice problems, you're ready for the exam most of the time. When it comes to memorizing stuff, reading your notes is great. What's better or more important is to put your notes away and try to recite them, or to reorganize them, rewrite them, or read them out loud to somebody, or explain them to somebody. Anything that's not just reading over and over again is going to help you remember the material and understand it better than just reading it over and over again. And then when you show up for the test, most people know, try to get there a little early, get a good night's sleep before, if at all possible. Read the directions carefully. So many people miss so many questions just because they didn't read the directions. Do the easy problems first. Get the ones you know out of the way as quickly as you can, and then look at your, how much time you've got left, and try to dedicate, an appropriate amount of time to the hard things. And that could be really important. And you got to keep track of that time. It's so important that you don't just find yourself at the end with 5 minutes left and you only got like 3/4 of it done or something. Make sure you answered all the questions, at least guess at the end. Very, very rare these days. They used to have these weird tests that they would have you take where it'd be like, if you missed the question, it hurt. Like if you answered a question wrong, it hurt your score more than if you didn't answer it at all. And that's ridiculous. And it's really, really rare. So the vast, vast majority of the time, you want to at least make sure you guess something. But, guess something that you think might actually work. Mickey Mouse is never going to be the right answer unless you're in the Disney class. Is there a Disney class? There should be a Disney class. Anybody have any questions about that? I know it's a lot of material. All right, so you have a student come in to talk to you. They're struggling in their classes, and you're there to help them out. How do you present this study cycle? It's best used at the beginning of the semester. Now, if they come in late in the semester, it's still useful to share this information with them. But the sooner that you can give them this information, the better use it's going to be for them. Because as you saw from it, it's a process. It's something you're doing over a period of time. It doesn't help you that much right before the exam. And I like to frame it as a time-saving technique. Study skills is a hard sell. Everybody thinks that they know how to do it. It's weird because you get these students come in. It's like, well, what's your grade point average? And they're like, it's a 1.9. And you're like, oh, well, you need to study like this, this, and this. And they're like, no, I don't like studying like that. And I'm like, wait a minute. Are you the person with a 1.9 or am I the person with the 1.9 GPA? Now, don't say that to them. That's rude. But I think it all the time with these students sometimes. They come in and they're struggling and you're giving them this advice and they're like, nah, that's not going to work for me. It's like, well, have you tried it? They'll say, yeah, but most of the time they haven't. But so I like to frame this as a time-saving technique. It sounds like more work, but in the end, it's going to save you time because you're going to get it right the first time. You're not going to have to keep, studying. You don't have to do the big marathon study at the end. You're prepared. It's task focused. You're taking it one step at a time. You can't do everything at once. And that's why it's so important to break it down into the pieces to help them kind of understand. So the kind of things that are going to hold people back using this. What do you think are some of the barriers that are going to keep a student from using the study cycle? What's going to hold them back?
I think they might think that they don't have time to use it.
Mm-hmm. And that's definitely, I think that's a big barrier. They see this and they're like, holy crap, that looks like a lot of work, which is why you're trying to frame it as a time-saving technique in the overall scheme of things. It looks like a lot of work, and it is, but by doing it this way, you're doing it right, and you're going to save time in the end. So that's absolutely a big thing that's going to hold people back. What else might hold them back?
Like some people just don't want to study that much and they're just not interested in studying that much.
Sure. And a lot of that, it comes down to motivation. Motivation is that's probably the hardest thing for study skills tutors and administrators like myself and professors to deal with, is how do you motivate somebody to do something? And so, one of the things that's really important is you want to focus on the details, but you do want to see the big picture as well. And the big picture is college success. You get this degree and it's going to help you be, the thing you always wanted to be. You want to be a doctor, you want to be an accountant, you wanted to, be something besides pumping gas at the gas station. And it's going to take some time and effort. And you're absolutely right. Some students, they're looking for an easy way out. And again, that's one of the reasons you try to frame this, and it's a hard sell, but you're trying to frame this as something that in the long term, it's going to save you time. Welcome, Christopher. We are in the process.
Hi.
We are talking about the study cycle.
Cool.
I will fill you in on that more later. But it's.
Am I late or?
No, we got done with
Okay.
the first part a little early, and I didn't want to make people sit.
All right.
But the study cycle is kind of the heart and soul of study skills tutoring, but it's pretty easy.
Oh,
But what we're talking about is what keeps students from applying the study skills that we teach them. And so far we've come up with time management, which we're going to be talking about in a minute, because I think the number one problem that students who struggle have is time management. That's the one that's getting most of them. But motivation is the other one we just came up with, and that's a close second. Time management holds students back more than anything. Motivation is really close though, because everybody, you see it in the internet with everything. We're seeing it with COVID. We're seeing it with people's viewpoints on health and safety, that they want things to be easy. And sometimes it just isn't going to be easy, and it can really hold people back. So what can we do to support the use of the study cycle throughout the term? Anybody have any ideas of things that you might recommend to try to convince students that using the study cycle really works? I guess another way to frame that is if somebody's issue is time management or their issue is motivation, what are you going to do to convince them that this might help them with that? It's not an easy question.
convince them that the study plan will work for them, or like, what are you referring to when you say it?
That's exactly it. How do you convince somebody that looking at their study skills is going to help them, is actually going to help them?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say it comes down to habits at the end of the day, and habits have to start somewhere. They start through consistency, and by doing something over and over time, eventually it won't be an inconvenience. It'll just be something you do. So
Exactly.
I would make it seem like it's attainable, and that it's not such a burden. Because when it becomes a habit, it's not a burden. It's just something you do.
Yeah. Are you sure you haven't been here the last half hour? Because that's actually really good. So it comes back to this framing this as a time-saving technique. You said two things that I really liked in there. One is all of this is about creating habits. Once it becomes a habit and it's a normal part about what you do, it gets easier, it gets faster, and you do save time in it. It looks like so much work. This, the study cycle, especially when I present it like this, it can be really helpful to present this, step by step, because when you show the whole study cycle, it looks like, oh my gosh, that's like a crap load of stuff to do. I think, yeah, kind of painting this like this, it looks like a lot of work, but when these become a part of your natural way of preparing for classes, it does. It's a habit. You don't even notice you're doing it or think about it anymore. It's just part of what you do. And then, like I said before, once you get doing it this way, you're losing a little time at the beginning, sure. That first few weeks of the semester when maybe usually you're slacking off, when now you're working then, you feel like you're losing time. But in the end, you're spending less time at the end part of preparing, and you really do gain control and save some time. The other word you use that I think is really important is that it's attainable. These are attainable habits. This is something you can do, that it's been proven over and over and over again to be successful. Who else has some ideas of how you might try to convince somebody, that they keep using this thing, that it might actually work?
I think going along with that, like one thing that helps a lot of students is when they like see like the action. So like if you can give them kind of like a goal, whether it's like a couple weeks or till their like next test or something,
Mhm.
and they can, if they use it consistently and try it out that way, and then by the time they take their next test, they can see the results and see if
Yeah,
that helped. And then if they see that it helped, they're like, oh, well, it does something. And then they're already used to
absolutely.
using it.
That's actually really great, a great example. This is true. I tell this to the course-based tutors too, when we're doing math classes, chemistry classes, etc. It's like, if you can find a practical example of how a math problem works, or how it could be applied, it really helps people to start, to believe in it a little bit. In this case, finding something, they an exam that they've got coming up, or a big assignment that they've got coming up, because we phrase this in the terms of acing the test, but this is true for it could be acing the test. It could also be finishing an assignment or a project. You still apply the same process to it, and I think that finding an example to run them through. We'll try this out on your next exam to see how that works, and and it can make a really big difference. I don't recommend that a student do this, but if a student really doesn't believe in it, I challenge them. We'll take 2 exams, do one your way and do one my way, and see how it comes out. I'll take the challenge on that one, because I know that I'm going to win that one most of the time. Now I say most of the time. If it doesn't work for them, it's not going to be because the study cycle didn't work. It's going to be because they picked the easy exam for their way and the hard exam for mine. It definitely you could show them, give them a practical example, and that's where what I was talking about before, and what we were talking about early, Christopher, was the stuff that you and I have already gone over about how to be a tutor, asking them lots of questions. And what you're asking them in this case is, well, how do you study for an exam? How do you usually prepare for class? Getting an idea of what they actually do, and then building on that. Well, the stuff that you're saying, is the same kind of stuff I'm talking about. I'm just talking about it as, kind of a bigger process, and not something you're kind of doing all willy-nilly. So no, those are exactly right. It's a matter of showing people, giving them real life examples, breaking it down into pieces, taking this step by step, and teaching it as a habit. If you have repeat customers in regards to this, what you'll see happen a lot is the students will come back and they'll say, well, I tried it, but it didn't work. And you're going to see that with what we're going to talk about in a minute about time management as well. Well, I tried to keep a schedule, it didn't work. Well, I tried to do the study cycle and it didn't work. And it really is kind of like learning to ride a bike and developing it into a habit. It takes time to get to the point where you're really doing it. And so you kind of promote it that way. Well, with schedules in particular, I'll tell students, I almost guarantee you it won't work the first couple of times you try it. You're going to have something come up. You're like, well, I was going to study or read my book before class, but I got busy. You know, things like that are going to happen, and you encourage them to keep trying it because it takes time to become a habit, and making studying a habit really is kind of the key to it. Does anybody else have any questions about that? How many of you already feel like what we just described is more or less what you do for studying already? Yeah, more. You know, there's always something that you don't do or that you do a little differently, because I think the thing that's one of the things that's challenging for convincing people to try this is the fact that one way of doing it isn't going to work perfectly for everybody. What you want to convince them, though, is just because one thing on the study cycle doesn't work for them doesn't mean that it all isn't going to work. You know, and they really do try to encourage them to try different things. So part one of this training is basically, you know, how to be a tutor in a very basic sense. The second part is this study cycle, which is a big part of what we're selling. You know, taking the time to prepare for your classes before class, taking notes during class, studying those notes after class, and taking the time to prepare. And I've got some more detailed information on this that I'll send your way as well. I don't want to overwhelm you though in 2.5 hours we got. But this third big part about study skills tutoring is convincing people to stick to a schedule. And this, I think, is a harder sell for some students than the study cycle is. But there are students, and maybe you're one of them, who are just have these brilliant photographic memories, and they're going to remember exactly what they need to do and when they need to do it. And that's fine. If you're one of those students, great. That said, if you're in to talk to a study skills tutor, I'm willing to bet you're not one of those students, even if you think you are. If you were, you probably wouldn't need to be in here. Now, don't put it that way. You never want to make them feel bad. But you know, you should be aware that if your students in to see you, they need help. You can be confident that they can do it. You can also be pretty confident that they're not doing what they need to do, even if they say they are. Don't call them out on it, but you know better, and that could be kind of helpful for how you try to approach it when you're talking to them. But I've often said to students that if I could go back in time and convince young me to do one thing differently, keeping a schedule would be one of them. Because I was very resistant to scheduling when I first went to college. I learned very quickly I was wrong, and I'm glad I figured it out quickly. But you know, I wish I could redo my first semester of college. The rest of it I did great, but that first semester was rough, and my resistance to scheduling was one of the reasons. Probably a bigger reason than that was mental health issues that I didn't deal with till later. But that's a whole nother topic. But scheduling could be a big cure for mental health issues. Knowing what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and how much scheduling you need varies from person to person, and every student doesn't need the exact same amount. What I do is I sell the idea of total scheduling, and then they can decide on their own whether they can get away with dialing it back a little. But block schedules, which is what I'm going to promote, and I'll explain that in a minute, it provides a plan, and it helps students to see when they have free time or wasted time. And it involves scheduling all the work, all the studying, and the fun too. And the fun needs to be there. It can't be all work all the time. Occasionally you sit down. How many hours are there in a week? Who knows that off the top of their head? You don't have to do the math. It's 168 hours. I just thought if somebody knew they could say, but most of the time when I have students sit down, I present that little tidbit. You got 160 hours in a week. Let's sit down and figure out what you're doing. And you put down, your allegedly your 56 hours of sleep you're hopefully getting in a week. And then, your 15 or 16 hours of actual class, and then theory, 2 hours of studying per credit hour is what they recommend. And then you got a job, or you've got, your sorority, or you got a club you're in. And the vast, vast majority of the time with undergraduates, it's a little different with graduate students. But with undergraduates, the vast majority of the time you do the math, and they've got 50 or 60 hours that they can't account for. At the very least, they've got 30. And all of a sudden, it's like, well, how can you say you don't have time to do all this stuff? And I'm including putting in some of the fun stuff as well. We'll see how that works in a minute. But what you're trying to get is to get students to treat study time the same way they treat their job or their meetings that they go to or their classes themselves. There's a scheduled time that's going to happen every week. So how many hours should a student study per week? Does anybody know?
Didn't you say it was like 2 hours a credit hour?
That's the average or estimate they give. And sometimes they'll say 3 hours. But 2 is the minimum, is what they usually say. Now, this is not etched in stone. Sometimes you have that semester and you got 5 classes and they're just not the hardest classes you've ever had. And then maybe you can get away with only doing an hour, hour and a half per credit. And then sometimes you're going to have that really hard semester and you've got chemistry and calculus and accounting all in the same semester, and they're hard classes. And maybe you need 3 hours, and that could be rough. One thing I do like I don't have a slide for it, but one good advice, always push the idea to people. Remember, all of this is temporary. One semester is temporary. If you're having the semester from hell, and everybody's going to have that one semester where they're like, oh my God, why did I pick these classes? It's temporary. Just, you got your 3 months, you got your 15 weeks. Just take it one step at a time. Get through this one tough semester. They're not all going to be that bad. At least that's what you're going to tell people. Maybe it will all be that bad. It depends on what they schedule. But yeah, typically speaking, for most people, if they're committed, 2 hours a credit hour of studying is going to be enough to get the work done and get it done well, most of the time. So we use that as our starting point. And if they find they need less than that, great. If they need more, well, we're going to talk a little bit about what to do with that. One thing that can be helpful is always, give round up a little bit, give them more study time than they need. And if they need less, great, but it's better to overestimate it than to underestimate it. And try to build a schedule where it makes sense for them, because the one thing that's kind of rough with being a college student is, I know, with the exception of today, I don't usually work on Sundays. I work Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 5 o'clock. That's my schedule normally. And when I do work on a Sunday, so I'm working 4 hours today on Sunday, that's 4 hours I get to subtract from my normal 8 to 5 hours during this week. So I can sleep in a little bit this week because I'm doing this today. But my schedule is etched in. Now within that 40 hours a week, things could be chaotic for me. But I know when I'm done at 5 o'clock, I'm done. I don't check my work email at night. Maybe I should sometimes, but I don't. I'm not checking it on the weekend unless I got something really big coming up. Then maybe I do a little bit. Professors, or at least full-time teaching a class professors, because I'm technically a professor, but their schedules are a little more chaotic. College students are even more chaotic. Maybe you got all your classes, that ideal schedule we all want. We want to try to get them all in there between 11 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. If you're really, really lucky, maybe you get Friday off. You're trying to work out a way to do that. And if you're really lucky, you get a semester, maybe two, that'll work out pretty well. Most of the time, it's all scattered about, and it's really hard to schedule things. And if you've got a part-time job in the evening, it's even harder. Or you've got, a sorority meeting to go to, or you've got a club that you're in and it meets at a certain time. You've got those things that make it really difficult. Fortunately, I don't recommend studying in big blocks anyway, so you can find ways to make it work. So what you're going to do with your students a lot, you're going to present this study cycle thing we talked about to them a lot of times. Sometimes you can get away with skipping that and going straight to, you talk to them. What's your problem? Don't say it like that. What's your problem? But you say to them, what seems to be holding you back? Why do you think you're struggling in your classes? If it's motivation, then we could talk about mental health, or we could talk about the study cycle, or we could just talk about your career goals or something. But most of the time, it's time management. That's the thing that's holding most students back. And you're going to recommend to them, let's work on looking at a weekly study schedule and see how that works for you. So the first thing you're going to write down on the schedule is going to be their class schedule. They have to attend class. That's something that has to happen. That's the first thing everybody always writes down. Include in that a little bit the time that it takes them to get there. You also want to get in there the daily care stuff, the things that have to happen. You have to eat, you have to sleep. Now you can squeeze a little studying into your lunch, and that's fine. I like to leave food time, though. I don't make that an official study time. You can, but I always think it's a good idea, if you can, try not to study when you're eating. Take that to be some you time. But it's okay, and recommend it. If you need it, if you're preparing for a big exam, you can squeeze a little reading in or something during your lunchtime if you want. But if you manage your schedule the right way, you shouldn't need to. And, and you got to get your sleep. The goal is to do all this during your normal hours, so you're trying to avoid studying at 3 in the morning if at all possible. You want to get some time off in there. We're trying to be realistic about this. I had my one day off yesterday. I didn't do any work yesterday. At least, if possible, you want to try to have one night during the week where you're not doing any schoolwork at all. I mean, during the week, like Monday through Friday, if possible. And you want one day per week where you're not doing any work. Most people, it's going to be Saturday, but it could be Sunday. Oddly, if somebody has an odd schedule where they don't have classes on Friday or they did it all Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or all Tuesday, Thursday, it can be during the week. But those students, be careful with them. Oh, I've got Tuesdays and Thursdays off. No, you don't. Maybe one of them, probably not even one of them, because you got to study, and it can't. If you've got all your classes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you don't have time to study for all of them on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So that's something.
My schedule's even worse than that.
What's
Mine's
that?
Tuesday. My schedule's even worse than that. I mean, all my classes are on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so the rest of the week. It's strange. It's really strange.
It is really strange. And the mistake that people with that schedule will make is trying not to have to do any work on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I mean, if you're brilliant, you're brilliant. But most people aren't going to be able to pull that off. Then you've got work and your extracurricular activities. And they're kind of like the student class schedule part. A lot of times that's stuff you have limited control over. If you work Saturday from 9 till 6, you work Saturday from 9 to 6. What can you do about that? It's, I hope you're not working full time and doing college. It's doable. People work full time and do college. It happens. But oh my God, that's hard to do. And I've done that in a limited sense. I didn't do it for long because that's really rough. I see that more at community college though than I see over here at FSU. And then it comes back down to what we're trying to help them with. What we just talked about, I think most students, they're doing that anyway because they have to. It's the study time that they're struggling with. This is what they're not getting done. And the starting point with that conversation, what are you doing right now? When do you study? How often do you study? Is it just between classes? That can work. That can be helpful. One of my colleagues, I don't promote this myself unless you need it. One of my colleagues promotes what she calls free study time. And for her, it's when you're eating, when you're sitting on the bus, when you're waiting between classes, you got like a half hour between classes in a weird situation, maybe, she's like, sit down and study. Use that time to study. I personally prefer to not use that time to study unless I'm desperate and schedule my study time out. And that's when I study. And if you stick to that, you should be able to relax on the bus or relax when you're eating in theory. But my colleague's not all wrong. Sometimes you need a little extra study time and you can squeeze it in when you're sitting on the bus, when you're eating a meal. What you want to try to think about with time management in college is think of school as being a full-time job. You're going to be in class for 15 hours and you need 2 hours per credit to get work done. And it's going to come out to 35 hours at least that you're doing classwork. It's a full-time job being a full-time college student. It just is. If you've got a full-time job on top of that, you've got 2 full-time jobs. It's doable, but it's hard. So you want to get students thinking about it that way. This is a full-time job, and if you're not doing well in your classes, it's because you're not studying for 30 hours a week. At least 24 hours a week, but preferably 30 hours a week. That's what most students need, is 30 hours. Preferably in 2 or 3 hour blocks. That's your goal. The perfect study schedule is going to be 30 hours where you're working 2 or 3 hours at a time, and that's it. But we've got to be realistic. Sometimes it's not going to work out that way, especially if you got a job. Sometimes you only got 20 hours. 20 hours is the minimum. If you're not studying for 20 hours, and when I say study, that includes doing the homework. It's not just reading the book or your notes over and over again. Doing your homework, working on your project, talking to the professor, that's all studying. 20 hours is the minimum. If you're not doing 20 hours, I don't think you can do it unless you're a genius or you have a really easy schedule. 30 hours is preferred. In some circumstances, maybe you need more if you've got a particularly hard schedule and you can make the time. And then Sunday night or Monday morning, you want to aim for that to be your planning time. You're creating a schedule, and that schedule is going to work most weeks, but some weeks are going to be a little different. Some weeks you're going to have to do some makeup work because you were sick the week before. Some weeks you've got a extracurricular activity to do. Your sorority is doing a special thing that week that they don't do normally, or the club that you're in is meeting for something and they don't normally. Sometimes you've got that week where you've got the big project that you're working on that's got to get done. Now, if you work on it every week, then maybe you don't have one week that's different, but most students are going to put some of it off, if not all of it, but at least some of it. And you're going to have extra work to do. So every Sunday night or Monday morning, you should sit down and reconsider your schedule and make sure it's going to work for you that week, because it's not always exactly the same. All right. We're not going to do the activity for it this time. But I'm going to send everybody an example that you can kind of look at and think about with your time. So the first time you work with a student, you want to find times where they can focus on studying. Again, they want to try to come up with 2 or 3 hour blocks. And then they want to fill those blocks up with actual tasks. I'll give you an example in a minute. I'm talking very theoretical right now, I admit. One thing I think would be really helpful is for them to kind of do a big task list. Sit down and talk about it. What all tasks do you have to work on? You got an exam to study for. You got a quiz coming up. You've got a paper to write. You've got a project you're working on. Make a list of all the things that they have to do. Break the big ones up into smaller pieces. That's a big part of this. They've got a big project to do. Well, don't say, step 1, do big project. Step 1 is break the project up into pieces. And then what are you going to do during this study break or this study hour? And then take all the tasks and plug them into the study time. Try to keep it to about 2 tasks an hour. Now that's an estimate. If you've got a bunch of really tiny tasks, maybe you're going to do 2 tasks in a half hour. But generally speaking, you're going to try to get as much done for a task as you can in a half hour, generally speaking. Front load the tasks because you want to get the hardest stuff done early. Save all the easy stuff for the end. What I call white time. White time is the time on your schedule that's blank. You don't have something specifically tasked for it because you've got other things to do. You want to get the hard stuff done as early as possible. So front load the schedule so that you can get that stuff out of the way. So here's what I'm talking about. This is my practical example of what I mean. This example is done on a spreadsheet, but people don't have to use a spreadsheet. They can use a calendar. They can use an app for this. That's totally fine. They can do it in a notebook. That's totally fine. So you've got in the brown spots, those tannish brown areas, the things that have to be done at a specific time. You have to go to class at 1 o'clock on Monday. You have to go to work on Saturday at a certain time. Then you've got the things that you really should be doing. You should go to the gym or do some other kind of exercise. And you should schedule when you're going to do that. Your lunch and dinner, that has to happen at a certain time. So you want to try to schedule that. Your club meeting or the other extracurricular stuff you have to do. Then you're going to schedule study time. And this is really important to do. Now, this schedule is looking at it realistically. My ideal schedule, my perfect schedule, you have 30 hours you have to work. You have 15 2-hour study times that you do. That's the perfect schedule. 15 times during the week, you're going to sit down and study for 2 hours. And I'll explain why that's perfect in a minute. But realistically, your schedule is going to be mean. It's not going to cooperate with you. And you're going to have something that looks more like what we're looking at right now, where you've got an hour squeezed in the morning. You've got 2 hours in the afternoon. In the evenings, you're studying for 2 hours every evening, most evenings. If things work out well for you, you get Friday evening and Saturday evening off. If things really work out for you, you get a whole day off. That's what you're aiming for, but it doesn't always work out that way. In this example, you've got a big 3.5-hour study session on Sunday because it just happened to work out that way. That's the way it was going to work out for this particular person in this specific circumstance. So it's okay to sit down with them and say, okay, well, this is the times that you're going to study. And I push this on students. I do personal academic consultations. I push this idea on students. I teach my student life classes. I push this idea on students. Scheduling everything that you can. And then you've got your white space that you can work with. You're having a really crappy week and you're not getting the studying done. You can do it during the white spaces if you have to. If you stick to the study times as scheduled, what do you get to do on your white times? Whatever you want. And it's not that bad. If you look at the schedule, you've got little times during each day that you can just sit back and catch your breath and chill a little bit, play on your phone, go for a walk, hang out with a friend, watch TV. And if you don't have a job, you've got almost all Saturday that you can do whatever you want. You take a little hour and a half in the morning and get a little studying done before lunch, and you're done. You don't have to worry about it now. If you got a job, it's a little harder, but this is a really good way of doing it, is giving yourself some time to have some fun. Now, I've seen some schedules where they have you schedule your fun time. I don't think you have to do that, but you need to create white space on your schedule where you're going to do the things you want to do. But let's take it one step further. Sit down with your students and make that big list that I'm talking about, the brain dump. Sit down and write out what tasks you have to do and assign them to these schedule times. I'm going to do 2 tasks on Monday morning. I'm going to, study for my quiz for a half hour. That's a task. I'm going to do the first part of my paper. I'm going to, do the research for my paper, or I'm going to write my introduction. I'm going to take some time to study for my exam that's next week. Come up with a list of tasks and split them up. Do all the hard ones early if possible, or do the immediate ones. You got an exam on Wednesday. Obviously, studying for your exam is going to be a Monday and Tuesday thing. If you're doing it right, you're not studying for your exam on Wednesday at all if you have an exam. If your exam's in the afternoon, if you've studied properly, you don't need Wednesday morning to study for your exam. It's probably not going to help that much anyway. Although in a pinch, maybe it'll be better than nothing. But so this is what being a study skills tutor is really about. If you're just going to break it down into its simplest tasks, you're going to sit down with students and you're going to say, a typical study skills session. Hey, what brings you in today? Well, I'm not doing well in my classes. Oh, well, tell me a little bit about that. And they're going to tell you their life story and everything that's going wrong. Their mom died. Oh my gosh, it sucks when something like that happens. Or they don't feel motivated, or or they're just, oh, this is just a really hard class. Or the one you'll get the most. I never had to study hard in high school, so I didn't go into this very seriously, and I'm finding out that college is harder. That'll be the one you see the most. If it's something really serious, we're going to come back to that in a minute. But if it's just, I don't manage my time well, or I didn't used to have to study in high school, but now I do, then you're going to introduce them to the study cycle. And you'll talk about the study cycle for a little while and what it is and why you think it'll work for them. And then you're going to sell them on this weekly schedule thing. So there's 2 things that are holding people back. Bad study skills. Let's talk about the study cycle. The second thing is time management. Let's talk about creating a weekly schedule. Sometimes they're going to be like, oh, no, I tried to do a schedule before. It doesn't work for me. Basically in that case, say, well, doing a weekly schedule is hard. It's a matter of practice. It takes practice. It takes time for it to be a habit. And sell them on that idea. It might not have worked for you before, but let's talk about it a little bit and try it. And say to them, it takes time. It takes time for this to work. When I say try it for a few weeks and I'll tell them right up front. I guarantee you it won't work for you at least 1 week. You'll have a bad week where it doesn't work, and that's normal. But try it for a while because it takes time to be habits. And I always fall back on this argument. This is something that's been studied over and over and over again. And if you go and you do a poll with the straight A students at FSU, and they tell you how they prepare for their classes, they're not going to use the terminology. They're not going to say, I study the study cycle. They're not going to say that. But when they explain what it is they do for classes, it's going to be the study cycle. And most of them keep a very tight schedule. And one of the things that always makes me laugh a little bit for our tutoring programs, so I do course-based tutoring here at ACE. About a quarter of the students that come in for tutoring for math and chemistry are straight A students. They don't even need tutoring. You know why they come to tutoring? Because their attitude is, I'm going to get an A in this class, and I'm going to do whatever I have to get it. So they come into tutoring just to hedge their bets. And they're easy to tutor because they do all the work for you. They say, well, I want to work on this. And they do, and you're almost just babysitting them. Now, you're not going to get those for study skills tutors it's very rare you're going to get a straight A student in for study skills. It could happen. They just want a little bit of brush up on keeping a schedule or something, but it's rare. But I use those A students. I'm like, the stuff I'm telling you today, this is what the straight A students are doing, with the exception of the geniuses, and what none of us are geniuses. What can we do about that? Some of the things that are going to hold students back on keeping a schedule. One is they have a bad sleep schedule. You can't make them get a good sleep schedule, but you can recommend it. You know, study after study after study shows. This one's been studied a lot. And it's been studied by doctors and psychologists and scientists. It's been studied a lot. You got to get consistent sleep the best you can. It almost doesn't matter when you go to bed, so long as you always go to bed at the same time and get up at almost the same time. But, you know, within reason. The other thing is going to be treating your self-made appointments like they're really appointments. And by that, I mean, you decide at 10:30 on Monday, you're going to study for an hour. You got to treat that just like it's a class, just like you made a doctor appointment. You have to be there. You have to treat it that way. This is what takes practice. You're going to mess it up once in a while. I tell students that. And it's okay. You're going to have that 1 week where you just didn't do it. Get back on the bike and try it again. It takes time to make it a habit. But once you make it a habit, it's a really big deal. It really helps a lot. And it does take practice. And then not planning what will be done during each study session. You're like, I'm going to study for 2 hours tomorrow. If you just sit down, you know, at 2 o'clock and I'm going to study for 2 hours and you haven't made a plan, you're going to procrastinate. You're going to waste your time because you haven't prepared for it. That preparation time at the beginning of the week, deciding when you're going to do what, really helps a lot. So this is a guide. It's going to be edited every week. You're going to have to shift things around sometimes. But if you don't plan, it doesn't work most of the time. Does anybody need a quick break?
Sure, I wouldn't mind a break.
Okay, let's take 5 minutes, run to the bathroom, or do whatever it is you have to do, and we'll get started again. So we'll get started at 3:50 and then try to get it wrapped up. So I'm going to take a quick break then as well. I'll be right back. All right, and most of you back.
Yeah, I'm here.
Well, you're here, so that's all that matters. No, just kidding. All right, who all is back? You hit the hand button or something. All right. Yeah, 4 out of 8. That's not bad. All right. So being a study skills tutor is really comes down to 1, being a good listener, 2, sharing, the study cycle idea, 3, helping people, create a weekly schedule. And, and that one in particular, you really do want to sit down with students and actually help them create a schedule. The study skills or the study cycle is, a little bit more about just explaining something, well, here's how most, successful students work. But the weekly cycle is something that you actually want to sit down and do. And I don't know if your office does. Our office has like little forms that we can use for that if we want. But you can also just do it in a notebook or do it on a computer. Like I said, a lot of students use it like an app or a planner or a calendar, and that's fine as well. But it really is about, actively trying to schedule out when the studying time's going to happen and what they're going to do during it. But the last thing that is a really important part about what we're doing with this kind of tutoring are referrals. And they're especially important. I mean, I teach referrals to math tutors and writing tutors as well. But it's especially important for your kind of tutoring because most of the students that are coming in for it have other problems beyond just study skills. There's exceptions to the rules. Like I said, you'll get a lot of students, why aren't you doing well in your classes? Oh, it's because I never had to study in high school and now I just haven't gotten used to doing it. And you'll get those quite a lot. But you'll get a lot of them, and one of you mentioned motivation is such a big problem for a lot of students. And the reason they're not motivated is because they're juggling so many other things. This has never been more true than it has the last year and a half with COVID, adding on top of, the normal things. But students are dealing with a lot of issues, and they might have family issues, and they might have money issues. They might be coming from another state or a city or another country, and they're having to adapt to being in a new place, and they may never have done that before. Some of them have relationship issues. Some of them have mental health issues. Some of them have physical health issues. There's so many different things, and it's kind of obvious to say it, but a lot of students that are struggling, it's not just the study skills are part of it. Not using a schedule is part of it. But for a lot of students, it's something else that's holding them back. The reason they're not studying better, the reason they're not keeping a schedule is because they are struggling with the motivation to do it because they're so stressed out. They just don't want to deal with it. And that's where the referrals come in and are so important to us. So you're going to have students come in and you're going to say, well, what's going on? Why are you struggling in your class? And you're hoping they'll just say, oh, I just haven't put in the time and effort and I know I need to. But you're going to deal with some students that are going to have some serious problems. And the number one thing you want to do is just be a good listener. Just listen to them talk, be empathetic. Don't go into big, long stories about your own problems. If you need a therapist, get a therapist or talk to your supervisor or something. And we all do it sometimes, you know, somebody, your friend comes up and they're like, oh, I had this really bad day. And you're just like, oh, well, listen to my day. Well, you're kind of not helping them that much when you do that usually. Empathy is good. You know, it means, you know, a really quick, oh yeah, I had something like that happen to me before kind of thing just says, hey, yeah, I've been there. I know what you mean. But you don't want to focus it too much on yourself. If you do need someone to talk to, you know, definitely talk to your supervisor or a counselor or something. But in this particular case, this particular situation, your job is to listen. You just want to point them in the right direction. You can give them some insights from your own experience. You know, it's like that's what empathy is about. Saying, you know, sympathy is, yeah, you know, I'm sorry that happened to you. Empathy is, yeah, I had something like that happen to me. It means, you know, you understand where they're coming from to some extent, and that's important. So it's okay to say, oh yeah, I had something like that happen to me, and, you know, and really quickly, you know, say what happened. That's a good thing to do. But, you know, you also have to acknowledge that, you know, but that's what happened to me. My situation might be different. And you don't want to dwell on that too long. You want to make sure that they've got time to talk. So definitely listen, you know, empathize a little bit. But in the end, the thing that your job is really is to get them to go to see somebody that can really help them. So it's not your responsibility to have all the right answers. You don't have to, you know, you don't have to give them a hug. You don't have to spend all your time talking to them and trying to figure out how to solve all the problems. You're not going to be able to. So, you know, don't feel pressured to be somebody's therapist for them, because you're not. You know, just hear them out, hear what they have to say, and then you're going to make some suggestions about, you know, where they might go to get extra help for that. And then, you know, your fallback is going to be, well, you know, here's where, you know, somebody might be able to help you. You should think about talking to them. And then when they say okay or whatever, then you're like, well, in the meantime, let me see if I can help you with some suggestions for studying that might help you out when you're ready to do that. All right, so here's a short little activity for us. What are some of the really great resources to help students that have problems here at FSU? What do you all know about already?
Well, I know the Office of Accessibility Services is
Yep.
pretty good for like undiagnosed or people that have already diagnosed issues and haven't gotten accommodations sorted out.
Yep, the Office of Accessibility Services used to be called the SDRC, but they're specifically for people who have disabilities, physical or learning disabilities. Very, very useful resource for somebody. What else?
I know they changed the name recently. It used to be the Counseling Center. I think it's like Counseling and Psychological Services now.
Yep.
That's a really good resource.
They changed their name, and I'm sure there's a really good reason for it, but oh my gosh, it's going to cause so much confusion for a while. But yeah, the counseling and psychological services is definitely a really great service for people, particularly if they're having serious mental health problems. What else? Those are the two big ones. I think those will be the two that you recommend probably the most.
And then I know there's like more like course-based tutoring, in a lot of different places. I know like the libraries have them.
Yep.
You guys have them for like specific like class and like subject area questions.
Yeah, so we've got tutoring involved, tutoring, group tutoring for a whole lot of different courses. ACE is probably the go-to just because we have the most of it, but you're right, the library has it, CARE has it. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute.
Wouldn't human resources be a good one if like something's going on with like a teacher or a staff member?
Oh, that's actually a really great one, particularly a staff member or professor. But yeah, human resources is there's also an organization called EAP. If you're a worker here, so this would be relevant to you. The what's it stand for? The employee. Well, it's EAP. I think I have a slide for it. But if you ever have any issues with people you work with, your supervisor or their supervisor or a coworker, coworker, you probably would talk to your supervisor first. But if you feel like they're not doing anything about it, the EAP is basically deals with employees that are having problems at work. But if you have a serious problem with something, like you think a law is being broken or you're not getting workers' compensation, you deserve it or something like that, the human resources definitely has organizations to deal with that. So yeah, absolutely. Or if you have a professor that does something inappropriate, there's, HR is a good place to start. So the
There's
human
also-
resources are basically like their boss. Yep.
There's also victims advocate, which is really good for like any sexual harassment or assault.
Absolutely. We have a very good victim advocate program. If you have an immediate problem, you can call the police. But the victim advocate's nice because they're more focused on helping you and a little less focused on catching the bad guy. Although catching the bad guy can be important too. So I guess that's one way. I actually never thought of it that way until I just said it that way. If the student's issue is they need to catch the bad guy, call the police. If their issue is that they need someone to talk to, the victim advocate's going to be better for that. Victim advocate especially can be good in those situations where maybe they should call the police, but they don't want to. Say it's an issue with a boyfriend or something. Sometimes people who have, are victims of crime, if the crime was committed by somebody they care about, they might not want to get that person in trouble, and maybe they should, but that's not our job to decide that. And the victim advocate's a person they can talk to that'll help them out with that, but not necessarily mean that they're going to be calling the cops and getting them involved. But no, those are excellent examples. So one thing about suggesting resources and making referrals, sometimes you're going to have more willing subjects for that than other times. People are reluctant to get help, especially in situations where they feel like it's reflecting badly on them, or if they've had a bad experience in the past. I had a friend who went to a therapist once, and he had a really bad experience with that therapist for a number of reasons. And so he went for 10 years thinking therapists suck. Well, no, therapists are great. You just got a bad one. He finally went back another, 10 years later, and it's been night and day the difference it's made for him. But he had that one bad experience, and you never know what someone's personal experience is. So, make referrals, but be sensitive of their feelings or their body language. I've often just said, I'm just making a suggestion for you to think about. It's up to you whether you go. You can always say that to people. So you start saying, well, you should go to the see the counseling. And they start to roll their eyes and go like this, and you're just like, yeah, okay, maybe you had a bad experience with that already. You're making a suggestion. Use good listening skills, listen to them, give them a chance to talk. You're not arguing with them about it. If they want to go, they can go, and if they don't want to go, then it's up to them. But try to identify the positives with them if you can. You're not being judgmental about it. You just, well, if the worst, I've said this about counseling a lot. I'm like, the worst case scenario is you had someone to talk to, and otherwise it was a waste of your time. That's like the worst thing that can happen. The worst normal thing. I guess the worst thing would be the counselor stabs you in the face or something, and I don't think that's going to happen. So I've often said that though. The worst case scenario is you went and talked to somebody and got to talk about it a little bit. But it's up to them. Provide all the possible information for them once if they do agree to go. Your supervisor should have all this information available for you. And if not, we can send it to you because we got like a list of these things. But make sure you know what the program name is, the location, the website, and any important information. And like I said, I would definitely ask your supervisor if they should have something written up for you.
Is that Dr. Teckett?
In our case, it would be me or her. In your case.
Okay.
We both have that information. So some signs that might, they come in, they need some extra help. In fact, actually, I'm going to go ahead and send information about that to your supervisor to share in case she doesn't have it. I'm pretty sure they do. Some signs that you might need to do a little bit more. If the tutee starts crying uncontrollably, you don't have to fix that. It's okay to get a supervisor to come over and help you. I mean, most of the time they start crying, you just have to wait and say, it's okay. It's okay to cry, nothing wrong with that. If they make statements that you find really concerning or alarming, they say something, particularly bizarre or violent. If they have real inappropriate behavior, if they start talking about killing themselves, if they talk about doing something bad to people besides themselves, they start doodling really disturbing scenes and stuff like that, let your supervisor know, and we've got people we can talk to kind of reach out to that student and make sure that there's nothing immediate that needs to be done with them. And it's okay, to say, I want to make sure you get the best help here that's possible. Is it okay if we go talk to my supervisor? I think that's a really great way of approaching it. Just be really patient. Now, don't get nervous. This isn't going to happen very often, if at all. Most of you will never have this happen to you. The crying thing you probably will have happen at some point. Somebody will start crying. That happens. Most of the time, you give them a couple minutes and they're okay. What happens with the crying a lot of times is they're really stressed out. It's building up. You're being nice to them, non-judgmental, and you've just created a comfortable environment. Sometimes the crying is actually a sign that you're doing a good job. They are finally comfortable to just let it out. They're just, they've been so frustrated, and now somebody's helping them, and they feel like they're actually getting help, and they'll start crying. And it's okay. Just give them a moment, say it's okay. And they'll usually, they'll cue you in, like, I'm sorry, it's like, it's okay. And they'll move on and they'll be fine. It's if they're crying uncontrollably and it's nonstop, then, it's a good idea to say, maybe we should get my supervisor to come over and help out a little bit. And that's okay to do that. But don't feel, if you're ever in a situation where it's getting like really uncomfortable or you feel unsafe, especially, definitely, you don't have to sit there and figure that out. Get some, talk to your supervisor. All right, I'm not going to do that right this second. So does anybody have any questions about that? I actually thought I had a list of the stuff on here, but I'll send it to your supervisor, although I'm almost positive she has that. All right, so we've got some scenarios that we're going to do on here, because this is particularly important, the referral thing. So I actually have some stuff to do with that one.
Are referrals a formal process, or is it like just recommending a department and giving them the means to to follow through with
It's a good question.
going
It's the latter. As far as tutors go, it's the latter. You know, you're just making suggestions of where they might go to get the kind of help that they actually need for that specific situation. And you know, when in doubt, ask your supervisor. But in most cases, you know, they're not going to need something. You know, you don't have to fill out any paperwork for it or anything like that. We're just making suggestions to them, and it's up to them whether they're going to go or not. We don't make people go to anything. We don't. There are people who do. There might be somebody making them come see you, but that's not what our job is here, is doing this kind of thing. So let's say we have a student, Alexandria. She's a sophomore, working on her public health degree. And she wants help coming up with a plan for the semester because she had a bad semester and she failed all her classes. She doesn't want the same thing to happen again. She's especially concerned about one of her classes, the Intro to Epidemiology. She is in primarily task-based courses, so they're courses where, you know, they're not like exams and stuff. It's assignments. You got to do this, and you got to do this, you got to do this. When they do have tests, they're typically multiple choice. And right now, she basically takes notes, and reviews her book. What advice would you give this particular student?
I would say to be successful on tests, Quizlets and flashcards would be really helpful since it's information based.
Mhm.
And to take time out to do these assignments and to, you know, work those in as your tasks for your study plan.
Yep, that's definitely a good start.
I think she's starting to do the study cycle just a bit with the reviewing the notes in the book, but I think she really needs to like implement it a little bit more and actually do reading beforehand and making sure she's going over her notes and actually test prepping in order to do better in her classes overall, so that she doesn't fail like she did the last semester.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing here is this is a student that you can help yourself for the most part. This isn't necessarily somebody that you're going to need to refer off to anybody. You can go over the study cycle with them. You can make some actual, you know, some test prep advice, you know, and maybe even work with them on a weekly schedule to help them, you know, get better prepared. So this one's a little bit tricky. Intro to Epidemiology. I don't think we have tutoring for that class. There might be somebody around that does that, but when in doubt, if there isn't tutoring for a specific course available, you can always make a recommendation to them to go to the department and see if they have any private tutors. Some departments do, some don't. But in any case, this is an example of somebody that you can sit down with and say, okay, well, let's talk about, you know, your you know, study, you know, strategies and what more you can do besides just taking notes and reviewing notes over and over and over again. So excellent. So let's say we have Chloe. She's a freshman in finance. This is her first semester in college. She's having trouble adjusting to taking college courses and is overwhelmed by her large class sizes. She did not do well on her first exams in the semester, and she would like help in being more effective in managing her time and remaining focused. She also thinks her performance on her exams is related to her feeling overwhelmed and her difficulty in making new friends. What might you suggest for this particular student?
I think because it seems to be pretty early on in her semester that like introducing the study cycle would do a lot of good here, as well as potentially coming up with like a schedule, like a weekly schedule. And also like as far as her feeling like overwhelmed and feeling like it's difficult to make new friends, maybe suggest like different clubs that she could try or organizations she could join to like meet more people.
That's all excellent advice. So yeah, this is another student that you can probably help mostly yourself. Definitely want to bring out the study cycle for this person. And I definitely, anybody that feels overwhelmed with managing their time, weekly schedules should be your go-to thing. It really can make a big difference. You feel overwhelmed, if you get control of your time, those feelings of being overwhelmed will almost always be reduced. And if they're not, then there's usually an underlying issue. But I also really like your advice for making new friends. I mean, the easiest way to do it is to get involved in something. And if there's anything that you are interested in, I can almost guarantee there's a club for it, if nothing else, maybe even more. And a lot of times it can be just a matter of looking at the Student Life Center website is a really great place to go to get more information on some of the organizations that are out there. The SLC has a lot of information on that. So yeah, definitely, encourage them to be involved. If they're reluctant to be involved, then then maybe you might consider recommending them talking to the counseling and psychological services people, just to see if maybe there's some kind of underlying issue that she's dealing with. But with somebody like this who's just starting off, they probably don't need that, unless they seem really, really resistant to trying to get involved in the school. But that can be a really big help for getting to know people. If nothing else, getting involved in the finance department can help her find some friends as well, which could also help her in classes. Michael wants help with discipline and creating an effective study schedule. Though he does have study times, he feels as if there is not enough time in the day. He does not know how to plan, which affects how he studies because he never knows what to do or how much time he has left. He has a calendar, but not a planner, and he is stressed. He only has class Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and does have free time on the weekends. He seems willing to learn. What would you recommend to Michael?
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say that I think Michael would also really benefit from having his weekly schedule planned out, like before the week starts. Not having like a breakdown of your week makes it seem a little bit more hectic, and then like just having set times for set things, it makes you like, it lets you feel that you have enough time in the day, I guess, which he doesn't.
Sure. What else might we do?
I would say furthermore, once you have like the basis or like foundation of your study schedule, I guess, you could create a list of like all the tasks he needs to do and like break that down. So if he has a paper or something, like break it down like, oh, I need to make sure I do my introduction, or like I want to write half my paper, like mini goals like that become tasks. And then he can put it into his study time. So specifically he knows on his schedule, oh, during this time I will be doing my paper for my class or something like that.
Absolutely. I almost guarantee that that's exactly what's missing from his strategy right now, that he's kind of doing what we're talking about, but he hasn't taken that one last step of plugging in the specifics that need to be done. The other thing I would ask a student like this is, how are they using their Tuesday, Thursday? Because there is a tendency, like we mentioned, the people that have just class on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or just on Tuesday, Thursday, sometimes those free days become completely free days and they don't get enough done. And whereas you do want to emphasize, I emphasize this a lot. You have to find time to do the stuff you want to do, the fun stuff. It has to be there. But they need to make sure that they're using all their time, wisely. So I would definitely ask the student how they're using their Tuesdays and Thursdays. and making sure they're taking advantage of those couple of days to, to get things done, at least part of the time, if not, the smart thing to do when you have that schedule is to really hunker down on Tuesday and Thursday to get your work done so that you have your weekends to yourself if possible. Ashley wants to create a study plan for her upcoming chemistry exam. So far, Ashley has prepared flashcards, reviewed her notes, and read the chapters and completed practice problems. From what her professor has shared with the class, they can expect the exam to be heavily math-based and memorization of elements is essential. Ashley's professor has provided the class with a practice exam and additional resources to prepare for the upcoming exam. What would you say to this student? This one might be a little tricky because it all sounds really good right on the surface.
In those cases, really, like, especially the math-based questions, repetition is kind of necessary.
Sure.
So I would say grabbing some practice problems and trying to work them through it, even though that might not be what we're specializing in as a study skills tutor. What we can do is we can kind of guide them to finding the practice questions. And if there are some fundamental things that they don't understand that we also don't understand, maybe referring them over to the math skills tutors.
Sure.
And really just emphasizing that repetition part though. And then for the memorizing the elements, like, since that really isn't as much repetition, maybe help them make an acronym on the elements, just things as simple as that. Like when remembering the planets, right? Like, or remembering the elements, acronyms can help, chunking certain things can help. Really just kind of adapt depending on what it is.
That's absolutely true. And I think that's a really good advice. What else would we do with her? Definitely recommend tutoring if she feels like that. She's got all been given all the resources she needs for this. If she feels like that's not enough, definitely would recommend tutoring. What's the thing you think she needs the most right here?
I think she just needs to schedule it out and time manage, because she has everything. She just has to implement it. And so that's what we would help with, essentially.
That's how I feel about this one as well. In the end, she's doing the stuff she needs to do, especially doing practice problems. But she needs to make sure she's taking the time to do it over a period of time, I think is the key. I mean, if the exam's tomorrow, then you just do what you can. But if she's got the time, just sticking to this plan and doing it over a period of time, a little bit each day, will be much more helpful to her than waiting to the last minute. But she definitely, schedule it out. And other than that, this one seems like she's on the right track. I don't know why some of them have names, some of them do not. AH is a first-year student who is having trouble in several of her courses. I can tell I didn't write this because I would never say a student that, because a student is a person. So a student who is having trouble in several of her courses. She has a C average, so not too bad, but could be better. She's having the most difficulty in calculus. She failed the first exam and is considering dropping the course because she does not believe she can pull her grade up. By the way, I haven't said this yet. If anybody is ever considering dropping a course, do not advise them on that. Pro or con, maybe dropping the course is the right thing to do. Highly advise them to try to get an appointment with their academic advisor. That said, as in this example, she tried to schedule an appointment with her academic advisor to discuss this option, but they are booked until mid-November. Now that shouldn't happen, but occasionally it does. She feels frustrated because she thought she would have to dedicate the same number of hours studying in college as she did in her high school courses. Realizing that her current study methods are not working for her, She's looking to form new study habits. What recommendations would you make to this student?
I would definitely like go through the study cycle with her um and kind of figure out what she's doing and what she's not doing and start there, and then from there maybe build a schedule, because it seems like she doesn't know how to study, but she also doesn't know like when to study or how to manage that time.
Exactly.
But then like if she is struggling in a specific course area like calculus, I would like refer her to a math tutor, and even like a chemistry, English, and economics tutor if she's struggling in all of them.
Yeah, terrific. So what we're seeing here in a lot of these cases is that study cycle and the weekly schedule will be a huge help for most of the problems that these students will bring in. And I think this case in particular, getting specific help for that calculus course can be a big help. Now, one of the issues that's unique about this one is the bureaucracy issue, is what I like to call it. And it is one of the catches to being at a big research one institution. We have so many resources, but there's still some limitations. And you shouldn't have to wait till November to get in to see your academic advisor. But things like that do happen. And in these particular cases, if you get one unique and you don't know, ask your supervisor. But in this particular case, I would recommend a couple of things to this particular student. One would be to go to advising first, or to her department, depending on whether she's a freshman. So it would be advising first is the general advisors at FSU that advise people in their classes. And most people who are a freshman or a sophomore, their advisor is going to be an advisor first. If they've got a major, their advisor is probably at their major department. So if they're a biology student, their advisor is going to be in the biology department. In a case where they're having difficulties getting a hold of their advisor, the best thing for them to do is to go to advising first or to the department itself and basically say, I'm trying to get in to see my advisor and I can't, and they should be able to get some help that way. So that's one way to deal with that particular thing. In this case, as far as dropping classes though, definitely advise them to do that, because dropping a course, sometimes it's the right thing to do. But there are some cases where it can have some real catastrophic long-term effects on somebody, especially if they've got a plan in place. And a lot of times they're not as bad off in the class as they think they are. In this particular case, she failed the first exam. She probably has a couple of more exams left that she can pull this up if she gives it a try. And her advisor will be the best person to give her the advice on that. So if they're having troubles getting to their advisor, encourage them to go to the department itself or to advising first itself and see if there's a way that they can either temporarily speak to a different advisor, or that advisor can help, get them hooked up. And somebody also suggests they can reach out to an academic dean as well, and that's good advice as well. If all else fails with any problems you're having at school, the appropriate dean could be the person to go talk to as well. So excellent. Ronaldo wants help setting up a study plan for the rest of the semester. They recently failed their first 2 exams at FSU, and they're really discouraged. They're in multiple classes that require them to spend a good amount of time reading, as well as a trigonometry class and a chemistry class. All his classes require their own significant amount of time. As we begin to fill out the weekly study schedule, Ronaldo makes it clear that he doesn't want to study and emphasizes the importance of his social life. How do you respond to Ronaldo? the silence here, I think, comes back to something we mentioned before. Probably the hardest situations that you're going to see sometimes. I mean, the hardest ones are the people with the really significant problems. They're dealing with some kind of crisis. They're very rare. But of the regular situations you run into, it's these students that aren't really that motivated to do it, that are particularly difficult to talk to. And the best advice I have on that is to emphasize that their social life is important. If they want to be able to, they have to see the big picture. If they want to be successful in college, the studying has to happen. But the fun stuff has to happen too. And that's where that weekly schedule, the big selling point on that is, in the short term, you feel like you're losing your control over your time. And in the short term, you are. But in the long term, you're gaining your time back because you're going to get the work done. And if the work gets done, you can do the social things when you want to do them because you're scheduling for it. So you can sell the study cycle and the weekly schedule as being a way to recapture the time that you want for your studying or for your social life. Because in the end, that social life's not, you're going to lose all that social life, the college part of that social life. If you drop out of college, you're going to lose all that. You have to be successful in the classes, and that's not going to happen if they don't study. So, sell that weekly study schedule as a way of trying to salvage that social time that they want. And that'll usually work. I mean, you can't make anybody do anything. At the very least, you can get them to fill out the weekly study schedule and they just won't do it. And that's not your fault. You've done what you could. If the person seems like, they're very discouraged, definitely recommend tutoring to them. Definitely recommend, that they talk to the counseling and psychological services if they feel like, that they're really, really discouraged. If it seems like it might be depression or something. But generally speaking, with the person like this, a lot of it is kind of a salesmanship issue, that you could sell these weekly schedules as just being a way to reclaim their time, because that studying has to happen. But if they're controlling when it happens, they're also controlling when they're going to do the stuff that they want to do. But,
so this case is unique too, because he specifically makes it clear that he doesn't want to study.
mm-hmm.
And I feel like in that situation where the motivation to study really isn't there and they're already feeling discouraged, that's where you sell the actual studying portion, right? So I would start by kind of leveling with him from a personal experience I have of a friend who, had that same attitude and unfortunately dropped out of FSU. Just kind of remind them, like, why are you here? Why are you in college? And if it's for social reason, that's fair. But you want to get something done while you're here during your time. So
exactly.
If he failed his first two tests, say like, look, like I know you want Florida State to be a good time, and that's possible with the study schedule. You are able to balance a social life with a academic life. It is possible. You don't have to sacrifice that entirely to do well. But what you're doing right now, you're not really on the track to succeed. Like, you got to change something. So here's how
all your exams. You're not going to be here for social life either.
Exactly. Like exactly what you just said too. Like, dropping out and failing, you're not going to be able to see any of these guys anymore.
In the end, I think what you're selling right here, Christopher, is just that you can have it both ways. You can be successful at FSU and still have the social life.
Exactly.
It might not be constant social life because the work has to get done, but that's going to be true, for the rest of your life. That's going to be the case. It's always been the case. You always had school. and your social life came in, different than that. And it can be, it's frustrating. Ronaldo, I think, is the most frustrating student to work with sometimes, because this particular case, this is the student that's most likely to push back and maybe argue with you a little bit. And if they do get argumentative about it, just don't take it personally. Just say, well, you empathize with them a little bit. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. But like we said, it's like, in the end, though, you could lose all of it if we can't find a way to turn the classes away. Now, he failed his first 2 exams at FSU. It's not necessarily the same not 2 exams in the same class. So it's not like he's completely out of it in any of his classes necessarily. Failing an exam hurts, but it doesn't mean you're done. How many of you have failed an exam in college before?
Not yet, but
I was a pretty good student. I failed an exam once. And I still got a B in that class. So one time I screwed up, I failed an exam. And I learned from it. And
it goes to show that, participation, getting every assignment done. I bet in that class you were still doing everything else right.
Exactly.
Because, that's also a big piece of it. That's a big piece of it.
Yeah. So, but it happens to people, and it doesn't happen to everybody. You may well never fail an exam ever. Like I said, it was just one time with me. I screwed up once. But it happens to a lot of people, and it's not necessarily the end of the world. It sucks. But you can recommend tutoring, you can recommend better study strategies. But in the end, I can't emphasize it enough. You're not responsible for their success. You do your best job to make some suggestions to somebody, and in the end, it's up to them whether they're going to do it or not. Let's see here. I thought they had at least one in here where something bad happened to somebody, but I must be thinking of a different presentation. I think that gets the point across. And then, like I said, in the referral situations, whenever you're in doubt, get your supervisor involved in that, because that can be like a really big deal. But it sounds like you've kind of got this down to what this really is about. You're making suggestions to people. The one thing I haven't done that I normally would do, but like I said, I think there's a point at which, we've been here since 2. There's a point at which this stuff just starts to become all mushy in your head. So I'm going to send along some information to your supervisor that she can share if she wants. But the only other thing that we haven't talked about are some of the study strategies themselves for studying for exams and stuff. And the only thing that I would push on that particular is to encourage people to study in different ways, to not always do it the same way. Reading your notes over and over again is just not a very good study strategy. No, that helps a little. But doing things like trying to teach the information to somebody else, trying to put your notes away and trying to recite them, coming up with charts and diagrams for it. Flashcards can be helpful, although sometimes people over rely on those, but they can be helpful. Things like Quizlet, doing practice problems, all of that stuff can be really helpful. Working with other students is always a great advice. But the big thing, to push on people is to look at materials in different ways, because every time you look at it the same way over and over again, you're putting that information in the same place in your brain. Then you go to take the exam, you got to find that one spot it's in, and it can be hard when everything else is jumbled up in there. The more different ways you look at the material, the more different places it's in, and the easier it's going to be to find that information. So other than that, this is what it's all about. Does anybody have any questions about it? So I'll send these slides along to your supervisor and a little bit of additional materials that you can look at, and you should be all set. Nobody else has any questions, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Dr. Hawken. You too.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Yep. Bye-bye.
And will we be sent our work schedule soon? I can send.
I'll be sending
my
you an email
availability.
out about that tomorrow morning.
All right, sounds
I got a
good.
little bit behind on the study skills people, so I haven't sent anything out to you yet. But you think
Yeah.
about when you want to work, because you'll essentially be making your own schedule.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Have a nice rest of your day.
You too. Bye bye.
All right.